Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining this webinar. I know for the past few months, everybody has been anxious and the tariff policies keep changing and the impact of it is quite uncertain. So, we really wanted to do this webinar and, JJ was very gracious to share some of the strategies that he's implementing to help reduce the impact of tariffs. Just a quick introduction. I'm Dev. I am the co-founder and CEO of WizCommerce. As many of you might know, we are an AI-powered software platform that powers both wholesale sales teams as well as builds B2B e-commerce websites. We have JJ today here with us, and JJ is the CEO of the Gerson companies and also runs First Sales Tariff, which is his initiative to help others in the industry. I'll let JJ talk a little bit more about himself, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we're going to cover today.
Yeah, Dev, thank you very much. My name is JJ Hjalmarson. I've spent my career in imports and supply chain. Started in the consulting side of things with a small boutique consulting firm, really focused on strategic sourcing. Came back and worked for my family business. I'm COO of the Gerson company. I see a lot of friendly names here today. So for those of you that I know, good to see you, or good, thanks for joining. And then, yeah, I've also started a business called Wholesale Tariffs that the goal is to help small to medium-sized importers navigate this complex world that we are living in. So it changes every day, and you lose your mind if you try and keep up with it. So
perfect. For everyone, feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A, and we'll take them as we go, or we will also have some time in the end for Q&As. Just to kick off the session, before we dive into strategies, I think, JJ, it's best if we start with basics. For those who might be newer to this, can you quickly break down how tariffs work?
Yeah, a tariff is essentially a tax that's paid on an import into a country. Those taxes in the United States are controlled by the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol. You declare the value of your good as it's coming into the country, and then depending on where it's coming from in the Harmonized Tariff Schedule Code, or HTS code, you pay a duty amount. There are a lot of articles right now about the de minimis rule, which is kind of a loophole that's been exploited in our tax code by the likes of Shein and Temu. I'm not here to talk about that today. Though there's tons of articles out there, and it's very important to importers in our space. So
interesting. And JJ, we've been seeing tariffs being used as a political tool as well, right?
Correct. Really dating back, tariffs in itself are a economic and political tool to help level the playing field between nations. And under the Trump administration, dating back to 2016, 2018, really, they've been used as a negotiation tactic. Obviously, if you follow the news now, it's on again, off again. You've got Canada, Mexico, China, champagne and wine. It's become very hard to follow. I think the main date that we're all focused on right now is April 2nd, which I saw it today. They're referring to as Liberation Day. It's kind of I try to stay very apolitical, but yeah, that's the reciprocal tariffs, where they're saying any country who tariffs the United States, we're going to implement a reciprocal tariff on you. So April 2nd is really the new kind of called D-Day or Liberation Day for international trade.
Got it. Understood. And JJ, in terms of the real world impact, so when costs kind of rise due to tariffs, there are tough choices that businesses have to make. So what are the common responses available to the wholesalers?
Yeah, there's really a few paths forward. There's the do nothing, which isn't a great solution. If you look at this table on the right, lay out a few different scenarios. With a 20% duty, which is kind of the new norm out of China. Obviously, some tariffs are more than 20%. There's some categories that are now reaching 80%. But you'd see about a 20% margin compression. Using this example, if you're importing a good, or you're purchasing a good for $100, pay a 20% duty, your landed cost then 120. If you're trying to maintain your sell price, you're going to eat all of that. So I think what a lot of importers and retailers right now are doing is trying to understand what they can afford to absorb, if any, and then what their customers can afford to be passed on to. Depending on your business model, if you have pre-booked contracts, obviously that brings that into question on what can you pass through legally. I always encourage people to think about, are you wanting to maintain, and that table should say, are you wanting to maintain margin dollars or margin percent? So that middle column right there, the math is maintaining margin dollars. If you're a publicly traded company, you're probably caring most about margin percent because that's what Wall Street kind of holds you accountable to. I would encourage everyone to think about it as margin dollars because that's how we pay the bills, and that's how we can minimize the need to pass costs through to the end consumer.
Understood. I think we'll have a quick poll right here, and then we'll move on to the next slide. So JJ, I think you kind of mentioned, what's happening right now. Tariffs seem to be the new normal, so I don't think it's anymore a choice. Everybody has to kind of deal with it. I think you have found some interesting ways in which you can reduce the impact and reduce how much you pass on to the end consumer or the end retailer. So maybe we can just dive into some of the proactive strategies that businesses can take to minimize tariff impact, and kind of go from there.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah. So on this table, you'll see there's kind of different buckets that you can focus on with different levels of timeline to implementation and pain difficulty to implement. The first bucket in improving trade compliance. The first area that I focus specifically on is first sale declaration, which we'll cover in a little more detail in a few minutes. Duty drawbacks is essentially if you are importing to then re-export, you can claw back that duty. There's also some clauses on damages. If you import goods and they arrive damaged, you can claw that back. And then auditing your tariff code. One example that I like to use for auditing your tariff codes, it's a gray area and it's really called Scout's Honor. Obviously, if you're a Fortune 100 company, there's going to be more eyes on you and more scrutiny. But the example I like to talk about, I call it the Paul Revere rule. In decor, if you have a lantern, if it's decorative, it's one duty. If it's functional, it's another. So by changing the size of a handle on a lantern, Paul Revere, you can either increase or decrease the duty paid on that. Second is your refined go-to-market strategy. It's really that it's a sales-facing function and it's a product development function. How much are you going to pass through versus how much are you going to absorb? Back to kind of that Paul Revere rule. Can you change the specs on products? Can you change the product itself to change the tariff code? Everyone should be doing this. I would caution on the taking cost out of product. You can cheapen your brand and your product pretty quickly. And I think we've all seen or dealt with as consumers brands where you say, hey, this used to last forever. And now maybe I get 1 season, 2 seasons out of it before it rips at the inseam or starts to fall apart. So be really careful with that. Be mindful that tariffs, as Div said, I don't think are going away. Your brand is forever, and you have to keep that in mind. Your third is tackling your supply base. I roll my eyes pretty heavily when people say, well, why don't you just move your production? I think anyone on this call who's been in the industry knows it's not that easy. But it can take time, and it can take years. So you might have a factory that produces in China primarily, but they have a factory in Cambodia or Vietnam. So be asking those questions: where can products be manufactured? Go out and look for new sources. I think where it gets really complicated now and really challenging is anything can change with a tweet. Like what country is next to be in the crosshairs? So before spending a ton of time and resources saying, I'm going to move everything to XYZ country, these next 30, 60 days are going to be pretty evident on what's going to happen, especially with that quote unquote liberation day. And two, when you're shifting, China still is the dominant player. When you're shifting to maybe less mature supply chain areas, things can take longer. It's harder to get boats in and containers out. So you got to be mindful of that. The last is addressing your own supply footprint. This is a 2+ year strategy. Obviously, made in America sounds great. It's expensive, but it's really vertically integrating your supply chain, opening up your own manufacturing capabilities. I always caution people. It's again, there's you can do light manufacturing, you can do assembly, but becoming a manufacturer is a totally different ball game than becoming a design sourcer and importer of goods. You can be very, very good at designing and importing and selling goods, but the minute you are starting to use bombs and starting to track labor down to the second, it becomes a whole different ball game. So that's a much longer term strategy.
Got it. So in the short term, it's really 1 and 2 that people can focus on.
Correct.
Got it. And JJ, would you like to talk a little bit more about, or I think at this point we can actually take a question. So there's a question that Megan has asked, like, I thought duty drawbacks are not allowed with the new tariffs.
There's Megan, it's a great question. There's still a little bit of confusion. They are saying that the new 20% increase is not eligible for duty drawbacks. Again, there's on again, off again. So I think we're all kind of waiting to see what the official word is that comes out with the April 2nd deadline. But yeah, it's a great question. Duty drawbacks are, according to high-level sources, not going to be eligible for the new 20% tariffs.
Got it. And JJ, do you want to just talk a little bit more about first, like point number 1 and 2, like lowering duty value via first sale, and also on the go-to, like refining go-to market. And you did speak a little bit about how people can change the product or the material or things like that. Maybe you can just bring it to life with some practical examples.
Sure. Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, so if we go to the next slide. So first sale specifically is the process of identifying dutiable versus non-dutiable costs in your product. The way that U.S. Customs and Border Patrol defines dutiable cost, this is getting really into the weeds, it actually dates back to the Food Conservation and Energy Act of 2008. It allows you to identify non-dutiable costs in your goods and strip that out of what you report to U.S. Customs and Border Patrol. The really easy example that I give to understand is trading companies. If you're buying through a trading company, which I know a lot of people do, they have their pitfalls and they have their benefits. Let's say that trading company is you're buying a widget from a trading company for $100. If they bought that product from their factory they're making money on it. So let's say they bought that product for $80. Under the new 20% duty, the traditional way of doing it is to say, okay, U.S. Customs, I paid $100 for it. Now I'm paying a 20% duty on it, so my landed cost is $120. That's really not how the law and policy is written. It's really that you should be paying duty on the first sale, the first time those goods were transacted. So the value of that is really $80. There are other things that you can do to strip out non-dutiable costs. Transportation within Asia, a lot of times non-dutiable samples, freight, agent fees. So in that example, that $100 example, where your landed cost would have been $120, if you go to a first sale transaction with a 20% duty, your new landed cost is $116. So depending on the structure of your sourcing organization, whether it's a factory direct relationship, which there's opportunity for first sale with factory direct, it's a little different. It's a little more gray, but you're looking at 1.25% to 3% cost of goods savings by moving to a first sale transaction model.
Interesting. And JJ, just talking a little bit about the second strategy you mentioned. Any examples you can bring or give to bring it to life? Like how can people think about their product? And
Sure. Yeah, I think, and I'm the Gerson company, which again, not here to talk about Gerson. we're a seasonal company, and for a long time, Christmas product was not tariffed. We used to joke that no one wanted to tariff Santa. So in the past, what we would look at doing is, if let's use a lantern, a holiday themed lantern, for example. And again, this is not applicable anymore because they are dutying Christmas. But you could take a lantern and add a Christmas icon to it, whether it's a Santa or a snowman or a Christmas tree, something that, I mean, isn't materially changing the idea of what you're trying to sell. And then you can classify it as a holiday decorative item. There are other, so that's one example, which fortunately is no longer relevant. Yeah, I like to think of the Paul Revere rule. Just add a little bit bigger handle to your lantern, and your duty of it goes down because it's no longer a decorative lantern; it's a functional lantern. So there are, I mean, without speaking to there's so many different HTS codes. Part of the platform at First Sale that we're building out, there's actually going to be a HTS code optimization engine that will help people refine what they are classifying their goods as, because you're talking about differences between sometimes single-digit percent duties, sometimes 29% duty, which is where a lot of the duties went in 2018 and categories I work in. So yeah, looking at your product, saying, what can I do to change it? What materials can I change? Because the HTS codes are based on materials as well, is a really important part of it. Again, if you've sold a customer a good and they're expecting to get something, it's pretty hard to go back and change it. So a lot of that is a 1-2 year deal. But sourcing teams and product development should be linked arm in arm in this to say, I'm trying to think of another example, like resin. Resin has a duty code where metal has a different duty code. So should we be focused away from resin and into metal to help reduce your dutiable costs? So having buy-in across the organizations that we work in on the materials we use, the designs we use, the icons, are all things that we can do to help mitigate dutiable costs.
Got it. And JJ, how are you managing buyer conversation? So a lot of times people show products and those products they get later, but with the price uncertainty, it's kind of hard to manage those expectations, right? So are there any strategies there, practical insights?
Yeah, I'd say 2018 was different. It was new and scary. If you've been in the industry for a bit, you went through that, and people from a retailer standpoint, and I work in the wholesale business, retailers understand we're all kind of in this together. And it's how do you work with them to show them? I mean, some of it involves kind of opening up the kimono and saying, hey, this is what I can give. This is what I can afford to give. We're all in this business to make money. None of us are, maybe there's some not-for-profits on here, but we're all trying to stay profitable and pay our people, pay our employees, and pay our vendors. And so, yeah, just open and honest conversations with the buyers, the people who buy product from you. Obviously, there's going to be people that just straight up refuse to pay. So those are tough conversations to have, and you have to really assess your business relationships. I think a really interesting complexity to this is on the vendor side as well. We don't exist without our vendors. We need people to make goods for us. And it's understanding that they need to make money as well. Going off on a tangent, there's a really interesting article about Walmart and what Walmart was doing with its sourcing overseas, where they're basically telling people, hey, you're absorbing all of this. We're not going to pay a penny more. They were summoned by the US or the Chinese government and basically said, be careful what you're doing. You're messing with Chinese interests. So it's putting people in a very unique and difficult position. We all want to keep costs low, but again, we all only have so much to give. And when it comes to first sale, going to a first sale model, especially if you're working through a trading company, it involves trust. That's a huge part of it. It doesn't work without trust. I know on the next slide, there's kind of some details about next steps if you're interested in exploring first sale, but it involves your vendors, call it opening up their books to you. And it can't be done can't be done, and trying to not swear, but half-assed. You need to have documentation. There's a lot. It's not difficult, but there's a process you have to follow to stay compliant with U.S. Customs and Border Patrol. But probably the biggest part that you need is that vendor buy-in, because if they're not willing to share that information with you and there's not that trust factor, you can't do first sale, not legally at least. So yeah, I always tell people, define the opportunity. How much are you buying factory direct? How much are you buying through trading companies? Not all vendors are worth the squeeze. If you're only buying a couple $1,000s or whatever from a vendor, I guess it's all proportionate, but identify your 80-20 vendors, communicate with them, partner with them, share, hey, I'm not like, this is not a negotiating tactic. I'm not going to come back to you and negotiate with you on that first sale amount and say you need to make less. This is just how we help our end consumers. And then, yeah, you have to have strict adherence to first sale practices. There's a ton of documentation needed in case you get audited. Again, with anything U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, as long as you have a reason for why you did something and it's not overtly a lie, you're putting the onus back on the government to come back to you and say, hey, we don't believe you. So again, if you're a Fortune 500 company, one of the ones that we all know and love, there is more scrutiny on them than the Gersons of the world, but you still have to do it straight up. And if the auditors ever come knocking, you're gonna have to defend yourself.
So. JJ, we can maybe take some questions. So Brian has a question. Can you speak to the metal, steel, iron duties and their effect on various tariff codes? Also, can you clarify that they are in effect as of 3/12/25, regardless of the country?
Yeah, so I personally don't do a ton of work in steel and aluminum. Last I saw, they are in effect as a 25% duty on steel and aluminum, all steel and aluminum imports into the United States. There's an interesting article the other day about Australia. They have an offer that Trump won't be able to refuse to get that lifted. But yeah, it's in effect right now. Some industries where that's a big part is auto. Even if you're manufacturing here domestically, a lot of that steel is imported. Even if you're buying domestic steel or aluminum, obviously competition drives the world. And if the world is raising their steel prices, you might try and capitalize on that. So it does become a bit of a snowball effect. And there's a lot of people too in the space who they're US manufacturers, but they're using imported parts. Cars is a good example. We import a lot of chips, we import a lot of steel, we import a lot of aluminum. So even though you can say it's made in the USA, you're still getting tariffed on a lot of stuff.
Got it. We have a question from Sarah. Is functional lighting tariff differently? If so, what is it? And how do we reclassify based on what characteristics makes it functional versus decorative?
It's a good question. Without seeing the items in question, I wouldn't be able to tell you what to reclassify as. That is something that our first sale tariffs does help companies with. But there are even go on ChatGPT, load a picture of your item, say, hey, what is the HTS code of this? Put your description in it. It probably won't give you a recommendation on how to re-engineer the product, but these AI partners have gotten pretty good at dipping into platforms like U.S. Customs and Border Patrol to say, hey, here's the description, here's the image, here's the dutiable cost.
Got it. And JJ, is it a gray area, like functional versus decorative? Is there a lot of wiggle room there, or in general, like, and I haven't.
Yeah, it does get to be a gray area. Again, that the size of a handle, like, can I fit my hand through it? Can a child fit its hand through it? It becomes gray. So again, I am not a lawyer. Nothing I'm saying is representing myself as a lawyer. So if you have questions, I advise you to consult with a trade attorney. I do know some good ones out there if you have any questions. But yeah, start with scrape the HTS code websites, load some stuff into ChatGPT. It's a good place to start.
Got it. Adam has a question. How can businesses renegotiate supplier contracts to share tariff costs?
Another great question. It depends. If you have replenishment orders in place, might be a little Depending on the length of the contracts and the legal side of it, again, I'd have to look at these purchasing contracts. But as you look at, if it's a trading company, again, it's pretty black and white. It's a tough conversation to have, but it's, hey, I need you to open the kimono. I know you are not the factory. You are resourcing this to a subcontractor. Let's have this conversation about what you're making. Again, I'm not going to penalize you for that, but it will help me save cost and pass those savings through to my customer, and then therefore hopefully I'm buying more from you. Again, if you go that route, I would really, really strongly encourage you to not try to renegotiate on that, because we all know the vendor world's a small world. If they hear that importer X is moving to a first sale relationship and they made it one season successfully and then season 2 they were squeezed, you're going to burn those bridges. So it again involves a lot of trust. Again, we are working right now on building on a platform that connects importers with manufacturers while maintaining that veil of secrecy, that veil of profit margins. So hopefully there will be more to come from first sale tariff side of things. But yeah, our vendor, if you put your vendors out of business, that's not good business practice. So, but you don't get what you don't ask for. So you can always go back and say, hey, I need X% on items I'm hitting MOQ on or not hitting MOQ. Go from there. So,
got it. Richard has a question. If moving production, is the threshold 70% or more of that production needs to be produced in that new country to avoid the tariff?
Richard, I believe you're talking about transshipping. Transshipping is a different subject. I do have experience in it. It's basically the concept of, I'm going to use this as the example, and excuse my pink straw that doesn't match my cup. But let's say this cup is made in China, the lid is made in Vietnam. I bring it all in the United States and I screw the lid onto the cup and then I sell it as one thing. The question is basically, is it assembled in the United States because I screwed the lid on? Can I say it's made in Vietnam because the lid is made in Vietnam? Or is it made in China because it's a cup and the cup was made in China? Again, it's a gray area. I'd be very careful about skirting the edges when it comes to transshipping. People have done it and they've gotten burned in the past. The rule, I can't remember the exact percent of an item that has to be made in a certain country to declare it as made in. But a lot of people back in 2018 were trying to say this is made in America because they would bring in a widget and then they'd put a bow on it here in America. That's not made in America. That's kind of the definition of transshipping, and people get in a lot of trouble for that.
Got it. And JJ, maybe you can just talk about some of the resources people can use. I think with this amount of uncertainty, what is your go-to resource to find this information, and what tools have you found helpful in navigating this?
Yeah, again, I try to be as apolitical as possible. Depending on your news source, you're going to get a different lens on the merits of tariffs. Tariffs are what they are. They're a tax, and they're not going away. There's a Wall Street Journal articulist that I like really well. His name is Paul Berger. Just objective reporting on situations, sometimes just with their kind of the journal's rigor of their reporting. They're not totally up to date on some of the tweets and changes on a daily basis. But no, I typically try not to live in the news because you'll drive yourself crazy. I try probably once a day to go look and see what's happened, what's changed, reassess for the day. I think what's important to remember is once you kind of define the opportunity, define your product mix, and do the math, just do the math on start with 10%. What for a 10% tariff, what does that do to your bottom line? And then from there, whether it ends up at 5% or 10% or 100%, the math stays the same. Especially if you're following that margin percent or margin dollars equation. So trying to get caught up in the froth of things. I'm already losing my hair for genetic reasons. I don't need to pull my hair out anymore. Maybe it's not genetic. Dad, mom, if you're on, sorry. But it changes daily. You'll drive yourself crazy. So just try to stay in the loop. There are good sources out there. I like the Journal. I like Bloomberg. They tend to be a little more objective than kind of the merits or drawbacks of tariffs.
Perfect. And JJ, if there's one takeaway that you want people to walk away with, what would that be from today's session?
Yeah, I would say I have notes in front of me. I think again, remembering that it's just math, pretty simple math actually, to understand what a 1% tariff does to your bottom line. Do the math, keep that in the back of your mind. Be agile, be flexible, communicate with your customers. I'd say don't, like, as news comes out, don't scream it from the mountaintops because it could change 3 hours later. So I think from a sales standpoint, one of the huge frustrations is the moving target. Are we going to have to raise our prices X% or Y%? So having to go back to customers multiple times is a big challenge. It's a tax. I think a lot of people on here probably have their own personal tax accountants that help them minimize the taxes that they pay. It's a gray area. There are black and white parts to it. Take advantage of those. Again, it's not as long as what you do is defensible in the eyes of Customs and Border Patrol. First sale is a defensible strategy. You can save a good amount of money. So, and hopefully, I mean, you're either profiting on that or you're passing it through to your customers. And depending on your outlook on the economy, I think we all want to keep prices low coming into mid-2025.
Got it. We have some more questions, JJ, but we wanted to quickly introduce some AI functionalities that WizCommerce is joining. I promise it won't be long, but this is a shameless plug. And then we'll get back to questions. Yes, so Kai will be our first AI assistant for the industry. It would be available on WizCommerce app towards next month. And our goal with this is really to increase productivity. We've spoken to a lot of reps, a lot of teams, sales teams, and it does seem like people spend an inordinate amount of time on things that aren't really sales related. So we plan to shave off 3 to 4 hours from every salesperson's life and really give that time back so that you can get back to selling. Going back to the question. So Kelly has a question, JJ. Are vendors adding surcharge to invoices?
I think that's probably more of a question for the peer group. I'm not here to speak about Gerson business, so I can't speak to that. But if you go, I'd encourage you to reach out to your sales reps. If you have territory sales reps that work with other accounts or other lines, they're usually a pretty good resource in sharing what their other accounts are doing.
Another question, we have an agent in China that works with various factories. They have always charged us one price for the goods. We want to start paying tariffs on the factory cost. Can they just back off 20% and charge us as an agent fee? Or do we need to know exactly how much the factory is charging them?
Yeah, you need to know exactly how much the factory is charging them. You can't, especially if it's carryover goods, you can get into some trouble by just saying, hey, Mr. Agent, just reduce your price by X%. Like, I mean, if you're paying $100 for an item through your agent, and all of a sudden the Customs and Border Patrol starts seeing you paying $5 with some sort of back end agreement, that'll raise some red flags. So you need all the proper documentation to do that first. That would, if you're paying one price, first sale would be a good option there. But agent fees are non-dutiable.
Got it. Perfect. Audience, anybody has any other questions that they want to ask JJ? Perfect. Yeah, so, if you want to book a meeting with JJ, here's a QR code for that meeting. You can also book a demo with WizCommerce. We have a QR code for that here. That's all from us. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll be sending a recording so that you can share those with other people who couldn't join today. So do check your inbox for that. But really appreciate everybody's time today.
Thank you.